Thanks for tuning in. The Republican chair of the House Appropriations Committee is up next, Representative Ann Bollin, with where we are financially in Michigan, and a new Democrat running for the U.S. Senate. His name is Joe Tate. On the OTR panel, we have Rick Pluta, Zoe Clark, and Bill Ballenger. Sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubick.
Thank you very much. Hope everybody survived the storms that came across our beautiful state last night as we're taping here on a pure Michigan morning. Yeah, you got it. Welcome back to Off the Record. School safety. Major issue in the Michigan House this week. They passed some legislation which is defensive legislation, not offensive. Let's take a look. Almost 4 years after the loss of lives at Oxford High School, state lawmakers argue there is still more work to be done to prevent more school shootings in Michigan. And they are debating a 9-bill package which would help the schools to beef up their defense should another mass shooter appear. This former police officer and school resource officer turned state lawmaker from Clarkston wants the Michigan State Police to conduct mandatory training for local schools on what to do if history repeats itself.
Rep. Pavlov has a bill that requires the Michigan State Police to provide uniform, comprehensive school safety training for school resource officers and all staff at Michigan schools.
The defense for schools also includes beefing up the OK to Say state hotline where anybody can phone in a possible threat. And more lockdown drills are part of the package.
We're taking one drill away from the current requirements for fire drills, moving that over to the lockdown side of the drill package, and requires at least one of the lockdown drills being done during lunch, recess, or school assemblies, and at least one lockdown drill while students are in between classes.
But how extensive will the drills be? Will there be fake shooters in the hallways? Representative Harris says that depends on each school on how far they want to go.
It's not all about active shooters. Sometimes it's how to prepare for a hazmat situation in a school. Sometimes there are role-playing type events, right? Other times it's just how do we secure the doors? How do we secure the building? Where should we stand in the classroom? It's not all about bringing in role players. But a good portion of this is how do we react during, passing time in classes, especially in secondary schools.
State lawmakers are more than eager to debate these defensive measures and fund them, but not so much on the pro-gun safety groups pushing hard for an offensive effort to keep weapons out of the hands of mass shooters. This Oakland County senator confesses just before the last election. The votes aren't there for that. Is it being talked about? Are votes being gathered?
No, it won't. None of that kind of thing will happen in an election year. I actually have the assault weapons bill, the ban. It's one of my stocks. We may be able to talk about that next year.
The post-Oxford defensive measures expected to pass soon. All right, so Zoe, what do you make of this 9-bill package? They left one bill out, but does this make any difference or not?
Let's first just set the table with just how chilling it is, right? That we're sort of having these conversations and how normalized they have become. I just think I need to say that as, we're talking about whether kids, we're talking about like recess, lunch, and then, maybe there will be people dressed up as active shooters. I just think I need to name that after watching your setup piece. But I think what you did is you explained very clearly that we're talking about two different things, right? One is sort of these defensive measures where we've sort of, as a society, said, this is how it's going to be. Right? So what can we do to protect kids instead of these sort of active measures about the fact that we know that there is a mental health crisis that is happening. Some would argue that, that there is a crisis about access to guns among students as well, particularly after what happened, the horrific attacks at Oxford, of course, here on this campus a few years ago at MSU as well. And so I think there's efforts, obviously, as we're seeing in bipartisan efforts among lawmakers to protect students, and we have seen this for decades, whether it's, making sure that students, have backpacks that are gone through, or whether you have security officers. So you're seeing bipartisan support, but I think a lot of folks are saying, is this going to actually be the fix to keep kids safe in school?
Yeah, I mean, I want to tee off on that culturally, it's just so interesting that people of a certain age, maybe ours, remember fire drills as being almost festive. That the alarm goes off, everybody knows what's going on, and you stand outside, and kids are joking.
I like that.
Yeah, well, yeah, and now we're talking about a real culture change for students where it's not laughing, none of that you're going to stay under your desk, you are going to remain silent, and getting kids used to that.
And let's just not getting kids used to that. That is the new norm, right? And we're talking about for 6 and 7-year-olds. Like this is the new normal right now in society.
William.
Well, it's very sad that it's come to this, but it's absolutely imperative that we pass measures like this. I think this is going to go through the legislature, be signed by the governor, and I think it will put schools in a better situation to prevent this from happening, but there is no guarantee that these tragedies won't persist.
I know that you're not supposed to ask a question that you don't know the answer to, but that's why I'm asking the question. Why didn't the D's take care of this when they had a chance? Do we know?
They didn't even do well with the K-12 budget. They cut school safety. I mean, they just blew it on the whole K-12 school budget last year. That was one of the reasons they lost the House.
My question is still on that. How could you miss this?
There was a lot that was missed during that period of unilateral Democratic control. I mean, just look at, it's like, they did abortion, they did, budget, and then it just stopped. And I think that there are even a lot of Democrats who are going, we had our chance to do stuff like this and have it being a Democratic type proposal, and that opportunity evaporated.
Let's talk to the U.S. Senate race. Joe Tate has finally landed on a position that he wants to run for.
Are we sure?
No, I mean, it's fascinating. It was sort of a good forward promote going from, that final, well, I was going to say lame duck, but I mean, it sort of felt like that final year, right, of the Democratic-controlled legislature, at least in the House, to unable to get things done. And some of the frustration within that House caucus was over the leadership of then Speaker Joe Tate, who, as you noted, this week announced after sort of playing footsie with maybe running for mayor of Detroit, and then there was some reporting that perhaps he was thinking about a primary challenge to Shri Thanedar, the 13th congressional Democrat. And now, though, this week he has determined that he'll be running in the U.S. Senate Democratic primary.
What we just talked about with school safety ties directly into Joe Tate and the performance of the House, of which he was Speaker last year.
In his defense,
he did a terrible job.
In his defense, just to be fair, okay, but wait a second. He had a divided caucus. Okay, I remember Paul Hilligan's former speaker said, running this Republican caucus is like herding cats.
Yeah, well, okay.
And some of them are very liberal cats.
They all have split caucuses. Why should Joe Tate be given a pass for division in his caucus?
I want to explain to him what his problem was.
Joe Tate doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of winning the Democratic nomination.
Tell us how you really feel, Bill Ballenger.
No, first of all, in a crowded primary, Democratic or Republican, you can't really rule out any particular
result. What he really
result.
hurts is Abdul El-Sayed. That's who he really hurts.
Because of the Detroit vote.
Absolutely. I mean, it just sets things up for Haley Stevens and McMurrow outstate.
And just on the caucus, I mean, certainly it depends a lot on the caucus that you have, even though that caucus elected you. It depends on the leadership team that's around you, and it might not entirely be a leadership team of your selection. It's what was done to build a winning coalition. And it just, I mean, once it was done, that there were all of these pockets within the caucus that had distinctly disparate views of how the Democrats should manage their majority. And so, I mean, there's a lot of responsibility to go around in how that happened.
And let's not forget, too, how masterfully Matt Hall played those final weeks of lame duck as well. I mean, basically, whether you liked it or not and thought it was appropriate or not, just walking off the House floor, his ability to garner support from Democrat Karen Whitsitt, so that they're, it was
his ability to keep Republicans at an absolute no, throughout it. And it was a question that we were asking, though, is like, okay, it's one thing to be the opposition and stop things from happening. And now he's the speaker and, turning those talents to, well, actually stopping some things from happening, including Governor Whitmer's incentives program.
Yeah, politically, what's so fascinating right now, I think, too, is just the number of Democrats, as you mentioned, who are in this primary race right now. And then you have one Republican, just one. Now, that is not to say that, that it is early days, that there could be more. We're hearing Congressman Huizenga. We still don't know what former gubernatorial candidate Tudor Dixon is going to do. But, particularly heading into Mackinac, where you want to start, doing some fundraisers and everybody's up on an island together and you start getting some support. It's fascinating to me that we still only have one Republican and Mike Rogers, who's announced so far.
There was a piece that ran this week that the president did not want John James to run for governor.
There's been a lot of reporting.
He wanted to keep his House seat.
Because he wants to keep control. Now, is this a problem for Mr. James? Because the last time I checked, he's still running for governor. Okay, and does he assume he's not going to get the Trump endorsement? Is this a problem for him? Yay or nay, gang?
Look, if you're a Republican, the question of whether or not you're going to get the Trump endorsement really, really matters
and
in order to win the primary.
And that question is in play vis-a-vis Mr.
Absolutely.
Do we all agree on that?
Agree on.
Oh, absolutely. Although I think we also have to remember that the statewide candidates previously who have gotten the Trump endorsment haven't necessarily made in the general. Does it help in the primary? 147.9%.
But
did you notice that Mike Cox discovered that story? Did you see what he did? What did he do, Ricky?
Well, Mike Cox is new. What is he calling John James now? Jumping Jobs James? Is that the latest thing? Yeah.
So, and remember that Donald Trump's endorsement typically comes right about the point of inevitability regardless.
But no, there was a lot of sort of rumors about, had there been some conversations with, J.D. Vance asking John James basically to stay in Congress. When John James has been asked about this recently, I think this was 2 weeks ago, he said, I didn't get a call kind of thing, but that can be interpreted. I was going to say that can be.
You don't have to get a call.
Literally, you can say you didn't get a call.
Let's quibble over the means of communication.
What is the definition of call is?
Exactly.
Yes, but no, absolutely. I think it's 100% fair to say that the Trump administration would have preferred John James to stay in this swing seat.
Okay, now we have pre-recorded and in the can the interview with the House chairperson, Republican of the House Appropriations Committee, on where we are fiscally, or are we anywhere? We have with our guest now the chairperson, Republican chair of House Appropriations. Madam Chair, the House Fiscal Agency has sort of given you a heads up on where we're headed. Are we headed in the dumper or not?
Well, I think that we're not heading up. We're heading down a little bit. I don't think that this was unanticipated. It certainly wasn't. It was something that I was expecting or planning for as appropriations chair. We'll get a few more details later on this morning. But I don't think it's going to be as rosy as it has been in the last couple of quarters.
What does down mean? Can you give me a number?
Well, I think we saw some reports come out yesterday that it looks like we're going to over the next couple of years, we're going to be $1 billion down in the general fund. And that's a lot of zeros.
So how are you going to deal with that?
Well, I think, we are really going to stay on our course, exactly how we've decided to approach this year's budget and really taking a deep dive. You have to look back. We've had a few years where there's, I think, somewhat of anomalies with the manna from Washington for COVID. But, in 2023, we had a $9 billion surplus in the budget, and that's gone. And so taking really a deep dive, what was that $9 billion spent on? What obligations do we have as a legislature with those spending items?
Okay, so if it were up to you, what would you cut?
Well, we're taking a deep dive. There are a number of things. Number one, we have a lot of unfilled FTEs, for example. What is going on with these as employees? And so they're authorized full-time equivalency, full-time personnel for the state, and yet they're positions that aren't filled. I continue to see this number grow. This year the governor's proposed almost another 1,000 employees. We don't even know who's working at the state level anymore. Where are they working? We're going to have to look at property management. office space. I don't think we need to take on debt. We need to look at the programs that are sustainable. We really have to work very, very hard to provide taxpayer value dollars, and make sure we're on the right track moving ahead.
What do you think about the Senate budget that they're sending you?
I think it's irresponsible. I mean, a couple days before it comes out, and it puts us in a place, not only have we increased our spending over last year, but we also, it's billions of dollars above where thinks we are, that we're going to go into a deficit. As you know, we can't present a budget that puts us in a deficit. So we're going to have to work very hard to reel it all back.
Representative, I think that the thing that's taking up a lot of oxygen in this town right now is this sort of parlor game of when the budget is actually going to get done, right? We have the speaker who seems like he's not necessarily so sure that the statutory deadline of July 1 needs to be enforced. The House already passed sort of a $20 billion stopgap measure, anti-government shutdown measure. I mean, what should folks who are watching from the outside take away right now about when the budget is actually going to get done?
Well, I think that really the outsiders should really look at it as that this is the responsible path forward, that we are taking a deep dive. There were many unknowns. There still are. I get a lot of questions about that. When are you going to do it? Why do you have to do it? All that. But the reality is we need to be very, very dutiful. We have a big obligation, and it's mostly the insiders that are concerned. And honestly, we're going through the budget. It shouldn't be who you know in the budget. It should be what you know.
Representative, is July 1st a deadline that the House will meet?
I cannot guarantee that we're going to meet that, but I will tell you we're going to make every effort to make sure that we put forth a fiscally sustainable and responsible budget that provides Michiganders value for their tax dollars. We're going to really be working hard on public safety, education, and fixing the damn roads. We've made it very clear what our approach is.
Okay, but then what should K-12 schools...
What about fixing the damn roads?
Well, we've seen a lot invested in the highways. It is time to give attention to the byways and the driveways. And I absolutely think we can do it without incurring more debt. The governor went out several years ago and $3.5 million in debt. We're going to pay $2.5 billion in interest on that debt.
Can you promise the schools you'll have their budget done by July 1?
Look, I am going to work very, very hard to have the school budget done. I think that the school budget, higher ed, community colleges are really at the top of the list. We do have a stopgap measure, which is some form of insurance. House Republicans, what we passed out of the House in that measure was an increase in student foundation, $400 more, higher than what the executive recommended and higher than what's come out of the Senate.
I didn't hear you promise.
Well, I think we're working very hard. You have my commitment that we're working very hard. I understand the importance of that and the deadlines. There's a residual consequence if we don't do that. So we're going to work very hard to move it forward.
Well, the previous legislatures saw, and a Republican governor saw the wisdom of the statutory deadline of July 1st. Why can't you commit to that, at least on the House side?
Well, these are unprecedented times. I think that you look over the last 4 or 5 years with the budget, there are a lot of anomalies. We had the manna from Washington under the guise of COVID relief. We continue to just spend. I don't think that's the appropriate way to move forward. And yes, I was one that voted on that measure, right? Seemed like the right thing at the time. And yes, we do want to have time. But remember, our fiscal year starts October 1. We have a September 30th deadline. We are going to work to do our very, very best. But I think it's important that we have somewhat gone through a more deliberative process. We're going to have not rosy news later this morning in CREC. And that is relative to the whole planning. I think what the Senate has done is they put forth a budget that they have to go back and redo.
Not rosy news. And then, we haven't even discussed the impact that Medicaid cuts from the federal government, tariffs, right? And the implications that is going to have on Michigan's economy as such a manufacturing state. How are you thinking about what the future state is going to look like in 6 months, in 9 months, when, as you started discussing, the headwinds don't look great right now for the state economy.
Well, I think that's what we have to see. We know the economy is softening, but what do we do to lessen the impact, or what we can do to prevent further ones moving ahead, right? And so, yes, I am concerned about that, but I'm not concerned about it just starting today. I've been concerned since I got my appointment as appropriations chair, even into the previous budget years. We need to be mindful. The Medicaid we're watching very, very closely, but I will tell you, there's required services under Medicaid. There are optional services. Those optional services, I'm not going to say they're not important or we don't want to deliver them. What I think we have to do is be very mindful and thoughtful about what is reasonable. We've seen a very rogue department institute at the 11th hour optional services, that really are not practical, that most of us really don't have a path forward. That's not, the pharmaceutical drugs are one. We hear at the national level that they're saying we might cut back on pharmaceuticals. Now, I don't think that as a state we want Medicaid to not cover things like insulin for Medicaid patients or blood thinners, things like that. So we have to be looking ahead and thinking of those.
Are there parts of the budget that are sacrosanct? Are you going to leave the state police alone? Are you going to leave education alone? And you talked initially about employees. It's not hiring additional people. Are there other areas that besides that?
Well, I think there's a lot of waste in state government. All right, and the expectations.
With all due respect, every person in appropriations chair who has sat in this chair, fraud, waste, and abuse. Okay,
all right, and that's why we have BOJ. BOJ is similar to HEAT, and it's Bollin's overhaul of government expenditures or budget.
I heard Matt Hall, the Speaker Matt Hall, talk about BOJ at his press conference this past week, and I'm so interested about this because actually polling data right now shows that folks are concerned about the DOJ cuts of which BOJ is coming after. And what does that tell you right now about folks feeling like maybe things are going too far in terms of the cuts that are happening and the effects that they are having on everyday Americans?
Honestly, I will tell you, I've been through the budget myself, poring over it, our subcommittee chairs are, and I think that we can make cuts without jeopardizing education, public safety, our veterans, making sure the prisons can run, making sure that, parents can send their kids to school, the kids will be educated, they're going to be able to read and do math. We have to reset our priorities as a state.
So in other words, you're going to cut Democratic programs.
I am not going to cut Democratic or Republican programs. I'm going to cut what does not have value for the Michigan taxpayers. That's what we have to cut.
So if you were a dictator, what would be your top two things that you would just get rid of yesterday?
Well, what would I get rid of? I'd get rid of the earmarks. And we have done that. We have a very transparent and accountable process moving forward. That is one thing.
Earmarks?
Well, I'm not saying we're not going to do any earmarks, but I'm telling you, the process, we have changed. We have initiated that. I was a sponsor of the resolution. I've been fighting for transparency and accountability. And the second thing I would do is I would do clawbacks on many of those earmarks. There needs to be more accountability in state government, especially those ones that are arm's length away from us, like MEDC.
Wait a minute. You're going after the pork and the budget, quote, end quote.
Absolutely.
So, but earmarks alone, if you have to cut the budget, earmarks alone are not going to get you there. What is like one program within, name a name that you would go after to try and reach these budget numbers that you have to reach?
I would go after all of this new energy code and all of the, why does the state have to invest in all these vehicles that are EV? But it is very broad-based. I'm telling you, when you look at the state budget, it's like playing whack-a-mole. You think you're looking at one segment of the budget, and this is where maybe all the housing is, transportation, education, and you go to the next department, it's like, whoa, they kind of snuck that in here. And so, we have to unseal all that and take a step back and really, what is right for Michigan?
Do you want to
cut down on the regulations?
Do you want to shut down the government?
Absolutely, I don't want to shut down the government. I want the government to work for the people.
Yeah, Representative, different subject, financial disclosure, approved by the voters in 2022. How did this get screwed up by the Secretary of State?
It's a disaster. The website doesn't work. Really, it's the responsibility of Secretary Benson, and I think Jocelyn Benson owns the taxpayers, the legislature, everybody in explanation.
When Republican Secretary of States also had computer problems, were you aware of that?
Okay, well, they have. IT is, got a lot of spider webs to it. But I will tell you, I have never seen such a disaster as under this Secretary of State with the websites. It started with campaign finance, the qualified voter file, public financial disclosure. You know, I am been a longtime proponent of financial transparency and records, all kinds of transparency. You know, I believe that, you know, what we do, we should be open about. But it's been a disaster. I spent 9 hours trying to do my financial disclosure thing, anticipating that yesterday was going to be the deadline, and it was so frustrating to not be able to do it. I mean, it shouldn't be cumbersome. It should be relatively easy to do. I keep good records. I'm a former clerk, you know, and it changed. It was instituted last year. It seemed to work. Why would you uproot it all?
We have to let you go to the conference, but before you go, who's your candidate for governor?
I really don't have a candidate for governor at this time. I'm, you know, watching. There's a lot of time before we really hit the filing deadline.
We end the interview on a punt. Representative, it's good to see you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Good luck.
Thank you.
And see you more for Off the Record next week, right here.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.